Hey there, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andrew Clark, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the Origin Effects Revival Drive Compact. Okay, so I've been a user of the Kali 76 Compact Deluxe compressor for a really long time. And a couple weeks ago, Origin Effects was nice enough to send me a Revival Drive Compact to try out. And after spending a little bit of time with it, I decided I would make a video to just kind of go over the sounds of the pedal, but also talk about just how diverse of a tool this thing actually is. It's kind of a unique entry into the whole world of hybrid analog digital rigs that a lot of guitar players are using nowadays. The Revival Drive Compact is not only a super tweakable and diverse overdrive / distortion pedal, but it's also a standalone preamp. So what it can do is actually very similar to what like the Universal Audio Dream or the Strymon Iridium do, in that it allows you to completely ditch your amp for something that is a completely silent solution. Now where this thing differs is in that it is a completely analog circuit. And on top of that, it also does not have any sort of cabinet simulation or speaker IR built into it. So that does mean you're gonna need a separate piece of gear that can run some sort of speaker simulation for you. Or if you're in the studio or you're at home and you're plugging into a computer, you can very easily pull up a speaker IR inside of your DAW, which that's what I'm going to be doing for this demo today. And there are a lot of great speaker IRs out there. Usually you can get them for pretty cheap, and a lot of them are even free. So you might be thinking, why would you choose the Revival Drive over something like the Universal Audio Dream or the Iridium? Because obviously it's lacking like a pretty big part of the whole standalone amp sim thing. But what it lacks on that end, it makes up for in a totally different way. And that's that this thing can be totally used as a killer sounding overdrive on your pedal board as well. So if you want to run some sort of traditional rig with a real amp, or you want to run into the Dream, let's say you've got something like this already on your pedal board, you can access a really wide range of Tweed and Marshall tones, running it as an overdrive into your amp. But honestly, rather than talking about it, it's going to be a lot easier to explain if I actually just show you. So let's get into it. Okay, so our rig is super simple today. We've got the Strat, it's going into the Revival Drive Compact, and then from there it's going into this AB switcher, and the B side of the switcher is going directly into the audio interface and then into an impulse response inside of Logic. And then the B side of the switcher is going to go into the Dream first, and then it's going to go into the audio interface. And actually, to make it like a really realistic test, what I've done is I'm actually going to bypass the speaker emulation on the Dream, and we're going to use the exact same IR inside of Logic, just so that there's not a whole lot of variables going on, so you can really hear what this sounds like as a standalone amp versus running into a clean amp first. And yeah, let's start off with an overview of the Revival Drive Compact. Okay, so we'll begin by setting everything to noon. Now, there are a lot of recommended settings that Origin Effects have for you when you're using this pedal that all do different things. But what I really want to do is not so much focus on their presets and things and trying to make it sound like a Marshall or a Fender, but instead we're just going to listen to what everything does and then just try and find something that sounds good to our ears. Okay, so before we take our first listen to the pedal, we just need to quickly talk about this little switch right here. What it allows us to do is this P/amp setting is what we would turn this to if we are going to be skipping an amp and going direct. And it's essentially going to apply the appropriate type of filter to allow us to use this as a proper preamp. But if we are running it into an amp or into an amp simulator, then we would switch off of that. We would switch it down to EQ1 or EQ2. We'll listen to those in a second, but EQ1 is kind of if you have a little bit of a brighter amp. EQ2 is going to be if you have a darker amp, you're just going to get a little bit more brilliance and a little bit more sparkle out of the pedal. Okay, so we got the switch here set up to P amp because we're going to be going direct, bypassing the Dream to start. We've got all the knobs straight up and down, and this is what the pedal sounds like. Okay, so right away I noticed I need a little bit more output out of it. The output control on this is very straightforward. It's the same thing any output control would do. This thing has a ton of headroom, so there's a lot of volume there if you need it. Before we get into the highs and the lows and the EQ and things like that, I think the most important thing to talk about is this more pres knob. Now, according to Origin, what this knob does is it essentially allows you to control the negative feedback in the output stage of the amp, but that doesn't really explain like how this affects the sound and your tone. So as you turn this thing clockwise, it's just gonna work like a regular presence knob on your amp, but when you turn it counterclockwise, it's going to reduce the negative feedback. And what that kind of does is introduce like this really cool woolly character, kind of characteristic of old Tweed amps. The best thing to do is for me to show you. So straight up the middle. So it's really like two knobs in one. It's not like a very clear linear sweep that's happening. From there, let's go into the EQ. We've got highs, pretty standard. Okay, so now we're gonna take a listen to the gain knob here. This thing has so much gain on tap, honestly, probably more than you're ever really going to need. This is great when you're using this thing as an amp. You can really set it to kind of that sweet spot if you're gonna run pedals into it, or if you're not gonna use pedals at all. And then if you're gonna use this thing as an overdrive into a clean amp, which we'll talk about a little bit later, having that extra gain is great because you can have a super clean tone setup, and then you can just kick this thing on to get basically like instant cranked up Marshall tones. So this is what that sounds like. Now remember, that's single coils as well. Obviously, if you've got a guitar with humbuckers in it, you're gonna get even more gain out of it. I'm really not pushing this thing that hard. These aren't very high output pickups. I've noticed that the overall EQ of the pedal really changes as you turn that gain up. So I think it's important to also get into the other controls and really tweak it to find the sweet spot. We'll bring it back here. Let's keep some gain in so we can kind of hear what's going on. Last up, we've got the blend control here. This is gonna do exactly what you think it does. Just a clean blend allows you to blend your clean signal back in. If you're using it as an amp, you don't want to be doing that. You want to make sure you have it cranked all the way up, because obviously your dry signal is just going to be hitting your speaker IR and it's just going to be an unaffected, no preamp or anything. It's going to sound pretty bad. Just to give you an idea, it would sound like this. So yeah, not something you really want to be doing. But if you're using this thing as an overdrive, this thing becomes really handy because maybe you want to keep some of the characteristics of your clean amp. You kind of want to have like the clean and dirty thing kind of happening at the same time. Then you can go ahead and you can back off on that and have them kind of blended together. So you've got your higher gain or Marshall-y sounds in this. At the same time, you're still getting some of the character of your amp, whether it's a Fender style amp or something like that. Okay, and then last up, we've got the adjust control here, this knob that's really hard to turn. And basically all that's gonna do is when we're on EQ1 or EQ2 using this thing as an overdrive, we can use this to adjust some presence. It adjusts a few other frequencies to my ears. I'll show you when we move on to the next section here, but it's completely deactivated when we're using this thing as an amp. So when it's in P amp mode, it doesn't do anything. So we're not gonna worry about it. Okay, so now we're gonna switch over. We've listened to what this thing sounds like direct into the computer, but now we're going to switch over and go into the Dream. Again, I'm not using any speaker IR on the pedal. We're bypassing that and we're using the exact same speaker IR inside of our DAW. Okay, so I'll start up by showing you my clean tone with the Dream. We'll bypass the Revival Drive. It sounds like this. And I'm gonna put a little bit of spring reverb in there. Okay, so now to use this as an overdrive, we want to switch off this P amp setting to EQ1. Let me just kind of set this like this to show you kind of why you would do that. If I turn this on, it's going to sound very, very shrill because that filter is active. So if we switch it down to EQ1, now if we go down to EQ2, so for me, I actually prefer to kind of just leave this thing at noon. And on EQ1 here, my amp is pretty bright. So on EQ2, it's a little bit too bright. Now we'll go right into the more pres knob. This is kind of, again, our main control, but as an overdrive, it's going to work a little bit different. So personally for me, I actually prefer the more subtle movements. When it's more extreme, it's just a little bit too much of whatever is going on. So honestly, the sweet spot I've found is right about there. So then we can go in and start tweaking the EQ. I find this thing to be a little bit on the bright side because I like bright amps. So I actually prefer to back down on the highs. And we can actually bring the lows up a little bit. Okay, so I really feel like we're in amp-like overdrive territory. Just a quick A-B. It really feels very natural. It's hard for the feel to really translate, but this thing feels outstanding as far as an overdrive goes. Also as an amp, it really does nail the feel of a cranked amp. So let's just try playing around with the gain a little bit here to go for some higher gain stuff. Maybe bring the lows back a little bit. Alright, so that's going to do it for this little video about the Revival Drive Compact. I really love it when I can find a piece of gear that really has a whole bunch of different uses. If you're traveling or on tour and you want to have like a mobile recording setup, then you throw this thing in a bag with a laptop and an audio interface, and all of a sudden you can access all of these different, very analog feeling amp tones wherever you are. There's no need to haul around an extra little amp or anything like that. Then on top of that, you can incorporate it into a bigger rig, using it as just a general overdrive, using it as a high gain distortion pedal, or you can use it how I've been using it, and that's running it at the end of my overdrives and using it as kind of a way to just re-flavor my amp. And what I mean by that is I have my regular overdrive setup, whether it's the Analog Man King of Tone or the Protein. I maybe have like a J-Rocket Archer Klon type thing going on, and then I typically always run that into a Fender style amp. But when I stick this thing in between the pedals and this amp, and all of a sudden when I kick it on, I go from feeling like I'm playing into a clean Fender style amp into feeling like a Marshall or a Tweed or some totally different amp. Depending on what I'm feeling like, I can set it however I want. And because of that really high headroom that it has, pedals feel really good going into it and coming out of it. And if you're a worship player or you play gigs where you need to have no stage volume, then all you need to do is throw a little IR pedal after it. I know that TC Electronics makes a good one. Two Notes makes a really nice one as well. You throw that after this thing, and then you've got your whole amp situation figured out right there on your pedal board. Now, if you are going to use it primarily as that, it might be easier to just go with the Universal Audio Dream, Strymon Iridium, Walrus ACS1, something like that, because it is going to kind of cover all your bases with the IRs and the cab simulation. But if you want to have a flexibility of use cases, maybe you already have something like that, maybe you already use an amp, then with this thing, honestly, you cannot go wrong. So I'd love to hear from you. How do you think the Revival Drive Compact stands up against all the other options out there? Obviously, it's got some drawbacks, but it's also got some huge wins. And if you already own a Revival Drive, I'd love to know how you use yours. humbuckers. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and please also consider subscribing to the channel. I try to release new guitar content every single week. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.